Hi everyone, how's everyone going? Welcome back to the channel, welcome back my bookworms, and today we have another review as you can see, but before we jump into all that, don't forget, subscribe if you're new, like the content, comment away if you've read this series or anything else written by this author, which is Adrian Tchaikovsky. And I guess that's it. Let's go into the actual review. So today we're talking about Dragonfly Falling by Adrian Tchaikovsky. This is the second book out of a 10-book series called Shadows of the Act. And this is a fantasy series written by the author. And I know this author is very famous for his sci-fi books like Children of Time, Children of Ruin, Children of Memory, and all the other books that I still haven't read but will read someday. But this is his debut series, which was a fantasy series. If you haven't read anything from him, I recommend. All his books so far have been quite good. And if you haven't seen my review for the first book of this series, which is called Empire in Black and Gold, then check it out. This is the thumbnail. I almost forgot about the name, and there should be a card on that side where you can just click and go for it. I'll wait, I'll still be here by the time you finish it and come back. But so, Dragonfly Falling was published in 2009, and this is a mix between an epic fantasy and a steampunk fantasy world. There's steam machines, but there's also magic, so you can imagine the combination. On Goodreads, this book has over 6,000 ratings, which it isn't much considering that his other books have a lot more ratings, but I guess that it's not very famous, this series. I mean, before I read the Children of Time trilogy, I didn't know anything about this series, even though I'm much more delved into fantasy than sci-fi. And it was only after finishing Children of Time that I actually started looking more into this author and realized that he has this series. So I can understand that it's very underhyped. The score this book has is of 3.98, which is so close to 4 that we can practically consider it a 4. For the curious ones, the edition I have is from the Broken Binding, not their subscription. This is just a special edition that they did for this series. I'm pretty sure they still have it on sale, and because every time they publish the continuation of this series, they release them in packs, as in the first, second, third, and so onward. So this is just how their editions are made. This, as you can see, they have the sprayed edges that match the insect in the cover. This is the dust jacket that matches the paperback. But if you look at the actual naked hardback, it looks so pretty. It's very simplistic. It just has the same insect, but in that color, and it looks really nice. You're probably used to seeing the bee or the wasp that was standing in this bookshelf, but now I decided to replace it with this dragonfly because it looks just astounding, just like any other Broken Binding edition. So it's really worth it if you want to give it as a gift to friends or just to yourself, as a gift to yourself, treat yourself. But yeah, I really like this edition, and I can't wait to have all them all lined up and have all the insects in the different colors. It's really nice. But alright, going back into the actual review, I'm gonna start with a synopsis. You know the drill. If you don't want to hear anything at all, especially because this is the second book, so there might be spoilers regarding the first book, then just skip to the timestamp. It's floating around. I'll start the review right after. But if you are still curious, then stick around and hear me read the synopsis, not the review. The review I'll be talking, just the synopsis. Two young companions, Totho and Salma, arrive at Tark to spy on the menacing Wasp army, but they are mistakenly apprehended as enemy agents. By the time they are freed, the city is already under siege. Over in the imperial capital, the young emperor Alves is becoming captivated by a remarkable slave, the vampiric Uktebri, who claims he knows of magic that can grant eternal life. In Collegium, meanwhile, Stanwold is still trying to persuade the city magnates to take seriously the Wasp Empire's imminent threat to their survival. In a colorful drama involving mass warfare and personal combat, a small group of heroes must stand up against what seems like an unstoppable force. Alright, with the synopsis out of the way, let's check the scores for the first book so that we can have some sort of comparison. Empire in Black and Gold was a good entry. It wasn't astounding, it wasn't terrible, it had some flaws with the character in my opinion, but I think overall it was quite a strong entry for a debut and for a first book in a 10-book series. Now, will this book be able to improve on the character especially, or will it be worse? Let's find out. And we'll start with plot. So regarding the plot, I had a very big question when we started the book, or when I finished the first book, which was, will this series just be 10 books of the lowlands constantly fighting the Wasp Empire, or will there be something more, something that overarches the whole series? And gladly, that question was answered in this book. I'm not going to say what was the answer, but I'm glad that it's not just the Wasp Empire battling over and over again and then having like moving forward and moving backwards, because even though it's interesting, it would become quite stale after a while. The plot of this book still focuses a lot on the Wasp Empire, but we have a lot of POVs that are showing us different things happening in this world. Not only plot lines that are regarding directly with the Wasp Empire and the battles, but also plot lines that are taking into account the other new plot lines that will develop throughout the books. And those ones were the ones I was most excited about, because it shows that indeed the author thought about it and thought, how can I make this interesting throughout the series? So it was good because we had these two types of plot lines where one was satisfying, but it was just the action part or the character part. And then we have these others where it's just the mystery and the intrigue and also the twists. The thing is, if you're expecting amazing plot twists, you might be disappointed. But that's not to say that the book is bad. I think it's actually good. And I think focusing on military fantasy and adding all these new world building elements gives it a quite refreshing vibe to the whole story. So for me, this category deserves a 4 out of 5. As for characters, and as I mentioned, the character category was the weakest part in the first book. There was some potential, and I enjoyed having the contrast between the young and the old characters, almost like young guard and old guard. But aside from that, all the characters seemed quite superficial, especially the young ones. It felt a lot like a soap opera, and I didn't enjoy that much. So I was hoping there would be a change, or at least a development more deep in all these characters. And thankfully it was solved in this book. I think the juxtaposition of the old versus the young characters is so good, because usually we're used to be seeing the young characters in epic fantasy series, and so it's good to see the old guard also be involved and also be just as courageous or silly sometimes, making mistakes and having consequences for it. And we can see that it's not just all the young ones are reckless, the old ones can also be, but also the young ones can have wisdom that the old ones might have or not. So there's all this juxtaposition, and I love seeing this difference between the two types of characters. On top of that, I also felt like the young generation was finally having some real struggles to deal with, because in the other one it all felt very high school themed, and now it was more serious. They were actually having adult questions to deal with. Not that I think they were adult questions, but that's the only way I can find to describe it. But just things that they have to think about quite deeply. But of course, not everything was perfect in regarding to the characters. I think the author still needs to work on the romance and on the romantic partnerships in this series, because for some reason, all of the relationships between characters feel insta-love. Like, they see each other, they immediately fall in love. There's very little development between them to create a connection slowly that eventually leads to love. Everything just happens like this. And because there's not a gradual growth, everything feels extra dramatic, which doesn't really vibe with me. I don't really like when it's very explosive and dramatic, but it's still okay. So for this category, I'm gonna give a 4 out of 5. What about world building? I still find fascinating the mix this world has between the technology and the rise of science versus the magic or the decline of the mysterious. I think Adrian Tchaikovsky is able to balance very well having these two things, but still be able to add mysteries and add new ways of all this interact with each other. So without being too complex and without confusing the reader, I think it's a good skill that Adrian Tchaikovsky has. And this book was a great example of it, because the author was adding certain components of world building that were vital for certain plot lines to move forward, but I didn't feel confused while I was reading it. I thought it was smart, I thought it made complete sense, it wasn't misaligned with the rest of the world, so that was good. I don't want to go into many details because I don't want to spoil anyone, and I think it's truly more enjoyable if you're finding out as you read it. One of my criticisms regarding world building in the previous book was that I felt at the end we didn't really know much of Kingdom in general. It seemed like once you know what type of Kingdom they are, you can basically assume the whole population is like that, and I thought there should be some more diversity. And in this book, we focus a lot on the ant kingdom. And there was still that small problem of everyone seeming to think the exact same way. But then I had examples of people who were thinking differently, or even between cities, they were slightly different. So I enjoyed that. Still think that it's a bit off, but it has improved. So for this category, I'm also going to give a 4 out of 5. Writing style is next, and what I can say about this category is that it's been quite consistent between the two books. The prose is balanced, not so fast, not so slow. The action is well described, and I think especially in military fantasy, you have to be careful with the amount of action versus tension that you have. Because if you have too much action, then it becomes boring because it's just battle after battle. If you have too much tension, then there's not levels in the book. You just feel like you're always at a peak, and therefore you lose that sensitivity of it being tension because it doesn't feel like tension anymore. So you have to balance that quite well. And I think Adrian Tchaikovsky was able to do that. Of course, don't think he did that as well for actions versus love, because as I explained, everything felt very dramatic when emotions were coming up, but the rest was quite well written. As for descriptive prose, I think this book tends to lean on the more simple version. So if you don't like descriptions, you might enjoy more this book because there aren't that many aside from description of the different kingdoms or certain apparatus once in a while, but it's not too dense. So for writing style, I'm gonna give a 4 out of 5. And last is enjoyment. I think this category was also quite consistent with the previous book. I was entertained, I was curious regarding the plot and the world building, so that would keep me reading. But was it one of those books where I'm trying to find excuses to read more of it and to just finish as fast as I can? Not really, it wasn't that intense. It was enjoyable, I was having fun while reading it, but it stopped there. And the fact that we have different POVs, it always refreshes. When you're starting to get bored of one, you can always go back or continue reading and reach the next POV and therefore explore a whole new part of the world. So for enjoyment, I'm gonna give it a 4 out of 5. And so we reached the end of the review. I'll tally up the scores, and as you can see, we have 4 for plot, characters, world building, writing style, and enjoyment. This is a perfect 4, so all categories got a 4, which is an improvement from the previous book. And I can still see that there is potential for this book to improve even more. Not sure if we'll ever get to a 5, maybe towards the end, but I mean 4.5 is very possible, and I would expect the next one to be able to reach that. And I think the world building is quite refreshing. I haven't seen it done before, so just that is worth reading. Either that or because you've read other Adrian Tchaikovsky books, so why not read this one as well? But I want to know what you think. Have you read this series? Are you interested in reading? Comment down below. I want to know more opinions aside from mine. And if you're new, don't forget, subscribe, like the content, and I'll be seeing you every Thursdays and Sundays, okay? Cheers!